The Democratic Party is in trouble. Joe Biden's ratings for his speech are in the gutter. Mainstream media ratings are in the gutter. Traditional liberals have won narrowly, and from this, they're going back to sleep. They're no longer going to pay attention. Well, this happens every time there is a major election, a presidential election. When the Democrats win, they go, hey, we did it, and then they're gone. But the bigger problem here is not the routine trend of Democrats not paying attention. It is that wokeness is souring among the general public and may lead to Republicans winning in 2022 and maybe even 2024, depending on who runs. Right now, famous Democratic strategist James Carville is warning the Democrats that this wokeness is divisive and regular people don't care about it. The DNC chair agrees, imploring Democrats to speak plain English. But when we look at some voting districts right now, it would seem that without the rage from traditional liberals against Donald Trump, they're going to lose because many people, they didn't like Trump. They voted against him. And moderates, hearing about state-sanctioned racism, naturally say, nah, I don't want any of that. Now, you need to understand, wokeness isn't just critical race theory. Though many people focus on critical race theory, leftist identitarianism involves every aspect of identity. What the Democrats want, or I should say the woke Democrats want, is policy based on general identity, which could be your gender, it could be your race, it could be your age. That's what they're fighting for. And regular people don't like systemic discrimination, and they oppose this. This is resulting in some interesting things. Now that traditional liberals have lulled back to sleep and Republicans and conservatives are still on the offensive, it's really bad news for Democrats, especially when you start smacking them in the face because they're white. Eventually, they're not going to like this. Eventually, they're going to start hearing from their children in schools what's going on. And eventually, they're going to get angry and start pushing back. Well, the woke cult has permeated even into the CIA and many of our cultural institutions. It doesn't mean the war is completely over, though many have said, and even I've alluded to the fact that the woke may have won. They may have won the ground, but as I also said, the resistance still exists and it's never over. People are still going to push back and challenge this. Now, I don't think it's necessarily a ultimate victory for disaffected liberals because this basically means that regular people will probably just vote Republican because they're not woke. Well, Republicans don't put forth policy positions that I completely agree with, and I'm not a fan of the Republican Party as it stands. I think they're mostly just milquetoast obstructions so that regular people who don't like the stuff can't actually get past them. If people like Mitch McConnell are running and that's all you get, then I don't know what you're actually going to do to stop the rise of wokeness, unless, of course, people rise up even on the Democratic Party side and say, enough, we don't want this. I'd have to imagine even Democrats are starting to get upset with their kids coming home from school, telling them about insane racist ideologies, or when a young white child is told that they're an oppressor, even though they may actually be poor. And that is the big problem with critical race theory. Though don't get me wrong, there's still critical gender theory. Let's take a look at what the Democrats are saying about wokeness and why it's a problem. And then I want to show you an election that in a district Joe Biden narrowly won, flipping 70% against wokeness. If the Republicans can maintain this course and maybe pay attention to what like Ron DeSantis is doing, maybe they'll actually win and win very well in 2022. But hey, that's still a long ways away. We'll see how it goes. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com. Become a member by clicking the big members only button. You can go to the members area and we have a ton of exclusive segments only available to our members. A huge library of full podcast episodes with people like Andrew Branca, legal analyst, talking about the Derek Chauvin case. We've got Michael Knowles talking, I think it was like an hour long. We're talking about religion, a really great discussion on religion and philosophy. And you can get access to this over at timcast.com in the members area. But don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Let's read about why the Democrats are finally starting to realize why wokeness is bad news. And you know what? I really do hate the word wokeness and woke. But let's be real. I can't fit leftist identitarianism in a YouTube title, so I think wokeness is sufficient. Also, considering it's the colloquial word we use to describe this. Okay, let's read the news from Fox. They say, Democratic National Committee Chairman Jamie Harrison agreed with strategist James Carville's analysis that their party has an issue with wokeness and elitism, imploring party candidates to speak plain English. Harrison addressed Carville's criticism Friday during an appearance on MSNBC Morning Joe, telling host Willie Geist that he also gets frustrated with the phraseology that some in the party use, seemingly referring to Carville calling out Democrats for using jargony language like Latinx, Latinx, whatever. In his interview with Vox, Carville argued Democrats were being elitist by not speaking like everyday voters and connecting with them, which he said could prevent the party from building a bigger majority in Congress. Geist noted it was Harrison's job to build a majority for Democrats and asked him what he thought of Carville's take that the Democratic Party is viewed by many across the country as coastal, elite, arrogant party. Listen, I love Carville, and there's some truth to what he says, Harrison said. And ultimately, working people just want somebody and their leaders to speak plain English, to speak to them in a way that they operate, in the space that they can operate in. Sometimes I get frustrated as well with some of the terms and phraseology that's out there. But what we have to do is this, Willie. Ultimately, we have to see people where they are. We have to see them. We have to hear them. We have to value them. And ultimately, for us as leaders, we have to fight them. He went on to say that the approach would help his party's candidates gauge where the American people are so the party could build on its majorities. Well, the woke are not happy with this. They're angry. And for some reason, there's this weird alliance between the Democrats and the cult, but I'll take it. I guess it's because it's similar enough to their ideology, or at least the language they use. I think what actually happens is the leftist identitarians, the people who want government policy based on their race or gender or how they or their personal identity, which could be amorphous or nebulous. These people use things like anti-racism and diversity to convince people that they're the good guys, when in fact, what they're proposing is literally state-sanctioned racism. That would be government policy to reject or administer certain programs or policies against a person based on their race. Most people don't like that. Now, I'd imagine you watching, maybe you're white, maybe you're not. You would not be happy if someone said, because of your race, you're not welcome in this building, you can't get a loan. Recently, we heard that farmers were suing the government because certain loan forgiveness programs are being dished out based on race. Basically, if you're white, you can't get your loan forgiven, which makes no sense. Well, I guess to the cultists, it makes sense. Well, here's an interesting case from NOLA.com, April 25th. Quote, voters voted against wokeness. How Troy Carter defeated Karen Carter Peterson. Not the most important election in the country, but it was a moderate Democrat versus a progressive Democrat, and the progressive lost. And we saw the same thing back in 2018. The Economist reported, I think there was something like 79 races, primary races, and like 71 losses for progressives. I think when the woke go to people and say something like, we should have a government policy that bans people based on race, regular people go, what? Why would I vote for that? But when it comes to Donald Trump, people voted for Joe Biden. Joe Biden, of course, does want to embrace much of this wokeness, which I think will ultimately backfire. Joe Biden has rescinded Donald Trump's executive order on banning critical race theory. Joe Biden very much supports a lot of this critical gender theory stuff. You know, I'm not going to get too much into it, but the idea is, yeah, he does. I wouldn't call him particularly far left economically, but he certainly does like the wokeness. This means that traditionalists, conservatives, Republicans, many disaffected liberals are going to be actively on offense for the next several years, watching Joe Biden do these things. But the power from the Democrats often comes from traditional liberals who are whipped into a frenzy by the media, and they're not going to be able to do that without Donald Trump. Unless, of course, Donald Trump begins his MAGA rallies again, and unless, of course, Donald Trump does run in 2024. That is exactly what the Democrats need. Interestingly, the Lincoln Project ran an ad, or is currently running an ad, that mocks Donald Trump, saying that Mitch McConnell pulled a fast one. And it's really weird because it seems like it's trying to reverse psychology Trump into running again. And I think it probably is. If Donald Trump gets active, traditional liberals start paying attention again because they're pretty much uninterested in politics unless they can be angry at Trump. Then the Democrats get the support they need. But if Trump stays out of it and someone like Ron DeSantis takes charge, they're going to, of course, smear DeSantis, but they won't be able to do nearly as much as they did with Trump. Trump was a bombastic figure. Let's take a look at some predictions as to what might happen, starting with this. Dallas-Fort Worth suburb and an interesting shift in the elections. NBC News says in bitterly divided election in Southlake, Texas, opponents of anti-racism education win big. I love the propaganda from NBC News. Who wrote this? Mike Hicksonbow and Antonia Hilton. First, let me just point out, it was not bitterly divided. Candidates who opposed a local school diversity plan took about 70% of the vote in the wealthy Dallas-Fort Worth suburb. Okay. That's not bitterly divided. That's like a strong majority in concurrence. I also love how they call it a diversity plan. They're not diversity plans. It's state-sanctioned racism, but sure, let's read what NBC News says. 9 months after officials in the affluent Carroll Independent School District introduced a proposal to combat racial and cultural intolerance in schools, voters delivered a resounding victory Saturday to a slate of school board and city council candidates who opposed the plan. In an unusually bitter campaign that echoed a growing national divide over how to address issues of race, gender, and sexuality in schools, candidates in the city of Southlake were split between two camps. Those who supported new diversity and inclusion training requirements for Carroll students and teachers, and those backed by a political action committee that was formed last year to defeat the plan. Notice how the framing is from NBC News. This is the mainstream corporate establishment propagandizing for critical theory, and not just critical race theory, but critical theory in general. That includes critical gender theory. I am kind of frustrated with some of these prominent speakers on critical race theory because they're hitting at only one small component of the issue. And that is wokeness is not just about race. It's about identity as a whole. It is essentialism versus constructivism. These people believe that human beings are generic gray blobs that can be formed into anything. I think it's fair to say that nature and nurture both exist and both play a role. Well, these people are nurture extremists. They don't believe nature plays a role at all, which is kind of ridiculous because sometimes people are short and sometimes people are tall. However, there are many anti-woke individuals who only talk about the racial component of it, ignoring the fact that one of the issues lighting up parents is the transgender sporting issue. Caitlyn Jenner recently came out and said that it's unfair for, I don't want to put words in Caitlyn's mouth, but typically the issue is, as we've heard from Joe Rogan and now from Caitlyn Jenner, that people born biologically male who transition to women to compete in women's sports have an unfair advantage. That's what their claim is. And because of that, many parents are starting to get alarmed, wondering, assuming this is true, whether or not their biologically female daughters will be able to win and get scholarships. I'm using very specific language here just for the sake of, for you to understand, because I'm not trying to make an argument about that specifically. I'm trying to make an argument about Democrats and Republicans and not get sidetracked into talking about critical theory in depth. Okay, so I hope you understand that point. Anyway, I digress. Parents are starting to wake up to what's really going on politically, and it seems that when people see this, they typically don't like it. Whether you do or not is an entirely different factor. This was an election 70-30. The anti-woke won. They say on one side, progressives argue that curriculum and disciplinary changes were needed to make all children feel safe and welcome in Carroll, a mostly white but quickly diversifying school district. On the other, conservatives in Southlake rejected the school diversity plan as an effort to indoctrinate students with far left ideology that, according to some, would institutionalize discrimination against white children and those with conservative Christian values. This is a lie. They're trying to use language and an understanding from 20 years ago. I was very much opposed to moral authoritarianism from religious groups. I am not in favor of people injecting their religious morals onto other people. And I have many friends who are very staunchly Christian, Catholic, and conservative, and we all get along because we recognize we're each going to do our own things. Now, there are many people who I'd probably agree with on some issues here who are, I don't know what you'd call it, very much moral authoritarian in favor of Christian conservatism. While I may agree with some issues about free speech, I keep my eye on some of these people. Some of these conservatives who are prominent probably would not be for free speech once they gain that speech. You take a look at the reports about Mike Lindell's social network. Apparently, he's saying something like you can't use the Lord's name in vain on his free speech social platform. You see how it works? I'm not a fan of any moral authoritarians. I do understand a problem, though. Without standing up for what you believe in and protecting your society and its rules, just saying live and let live, well, it doesn't do enough because it allows authoritarians to take over. And this is a point made by leftists, the paradox of intolerance, that if you tolerate the intolerant, eventually the intolerant win. And that's true, which means there's got to be some limits. But I do believe, for the most part, in free speech, even for those who I don't like. But the reality is there's always some speech most people aren't going to agree with. Navigating the space is very difficult. Suffice it to say, the woke left has crossed a line for regular Americans, which may pave the way for Republicans to win because the Democrats are starting to sound a little crazy. Now, I showed you what NBC News says, but let me show you the overt propaganda you can understand. From Reuters, Republicans ask Biden to withdraw divisive proposal to teach more Black history. Okay, I'm sorry. This is about stopping the 1619 Project, not Black history. The 1619 Project is basically a work of fiction. Many historians have already come out criticizing it. There have been corrections made to it, and it's even getting roasted by the World Socialist website. So 1619 Project is not considered historical fact. It's considered divisive ideology and historical revisionism. Republicans don't want that taught. Reuters calls it Black history. Sorry, that's not true. But going back to this district, I want to show you what's really interesting, and I want to show you where this is bad news for Democrats. It's a bitterly divided election. Well, let's take a look at this district. Texas's 24th district includes this suburb. They say Joe Biden won 52% to 47%. Think about that. Joe Biden is pushing fairly woke principles. Like I mentioned, he rescinded Donald Trump's executive order banning critical race theory trainings in the government and contracting with companies that do. But people still voted for him. Why? Two reasons, I think. One is that people really did not like Donald Trump. This woke up traditional liberals and made them vote against Trump. This is from Cook PVI, a R+2 district, a Republican district. You get rid of Donald Trump. I mean, like, he's not running anymore. And then you wake people up to, you get people to be woke to the horrors that is critical theory in general, the discrimination against a person based on immutable characteristics. And regular people are going to be like, nah. Now, this is just one affluent suburb. So maybe it won't have a massive impact necessarily. But I do think 70-30 is fairly substantial in a district that went 52 to 47. But if we zoom in a little bit to Denton County, we can see that Trump actually did win the county where this city is, 53.3% to 45.2. Not really 70-30, but still a Trump victory. So I'm not going to pretend like it's the apocalypse for the woke left. I think there is a great battle before those who are anti-woke and believe in classically liberal values. And I don't mean traditionally liberal, I mean classical. That you believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You believe in the vision to a certain extent of the founding fathers, and you respect America for everything it's done in giving people civil rights. There's a great battle before us because the critical race theorists don't believe these things. These people, in my opinion, are just completely out of it. They are authoritarians. They are in a cult. They follow dogma. They don't care for truth. They say objective reality doesn't exist, and that's scary. They align themselves with the Democrats, claiming to be the party of science, and they outright reject science. And that's where you can see the true corruption of the Democratic Party, when they start acting like science doesn't exist, because these people follow dogma, tribe, not reality. And the reality is, many of these people have started intermixing the ideas within critical gender theory and science, arguing that male and female as scientific categories don't exist. I'm sorry, that's male and female literally exist as scientific categories, and it's just a fact. Now, okay, science can change, so maybe in 100 years they'll be like, look at that guy, he was wrong, or maybe they'll just believe other things. But you can argue that gender and biological sex are different. But what's happened now is because it's mostly tribalism, and because many people don't understand these concepts, they're now mixing the two as if they're one and the same, arguing there aren't just two sexes. There are, and there are some, and there is intersex, but these people have begun mixing gender and sex, which brings me to say that is not scientific. So the Democratic Party is embracing moral authoritarian fiction, and that's just a reality. Now, I want to show you what's going on with the 1619 Project. As I mentioned, Reuters calls it Black history. That's not true. We can see this. Tom Elliott tweets, 1619 Project creator N. Hannah Jones on efforts to ban making it part of school curriculums. This is fundamentally a free speech issue. It's not about the facts of history. It's about trying to prohibit the teaching of ideas that they don't like. Think about that for 2 seconds. What have we, classical liberals, social liberals, typically supported? And I don't consider myself to be classical liberal in the modern colloquial sense, because it typically refers to a center-right position. I've always considered myself to be a bit of a social liberal leaning center-left. But classical liberal values, I do reference in relation to the forming of this country. What does it mean to have free speech, and what did we fight for? Well, there are many people who wanted to have prayer in public schools, and we argued that a public institution should not be teaching ideologies because that should be separate. If we all have different ideologies and we're all in school, then we shouldn't have, ideological values being taught. It should just be fact-based in history. It gets challenging because where do you draw the line on ideology? It's hard to know for sure. With religion, we kind of have a clear distinction. Okay, we know Christianity is a religion, so we all said, hey, no praying, no prayer being taught in schools. I certainly think if somebody wants to pray, they can. Well, now we hear that the 1619 Project creator is saying it's a free speech issue. Since when was free speech about mandating public schools teach something? Since when was free speech about protecting the speech of the state? Sorry, it's not. And James Lindsay makes a great point. Actually, not this one. This one. He says free speech is for individuals, not governments. Don't be fooled by manipulative arguments. PSA on free speech and banning critical race theory. The First Amendment prohibits the state, or people acting with the authority of the state, from suppressing speech by the people. It does not prohibit the people from prohibiting speech by the state or people acting with the authority of the state. The Hatch Act, for example, prohibits government employees from engaging in partisan speech in their capacity as government employees. That is perfectly fine. The people need protection from the state. The state does not. It serves the people. Telling public schools you can't teach something is not banning free speech. The public schools are government-run institutions. They should actually be under the control of the people. This is where it gets interesting. If the people then vote to teach critical race theory, then I guess they could, or critical theory in general. However, if these districts are voting against it, it's not banning speech. Or I should say it's not banning free speech. It's restricting what the government is teaching people. And I just want to point out with another tweet from James Lindsay, do you think I actually believe these people care about any of this racism stuff when 48 people voted against this bill, this amendment that would have protected Asians from discrimination? Ted Cruz proposed an amendment to a bill that would have prohibited federal funding for any institution or of higher education that discriminates against Asians in recruitment, applicant review, or admission. And 48 Democrats said nay. They want to be able to discriminate against Asians? Yes, of course they do, because they are racists. Critical race theory is state-sanctioned racism. It is anti-scientific, it is constructivist, and it is becoming prominent. And people are starting to wake up to what this means. Over at the ACLU, February 11th, 2021, I love this one. They say the ACLU of Iowa is strongly opposed to House File 222, which bans K-12 public schools, community colleges, and state universities from using any United States history curriculum that in whole or in part is derived from the 1619 Project. The ACLU says this bill is an incredibly harmful government attempt at censorship with the goal of shutting down ideas and preventing students from being exposed to an important discussion on the impact and legacy of slavery in our country. Except the 1619 Project is not real. Historians have come out basically saying it's a bunch of bunk nonsense. So I don't know who you want to trust in that regard. Maybe those historians are wrong. But even, I think the founder, the creator of the project said it wasn't meant to be an actual historical depiction. If someone says schools shouldn't teach ideology, then vote on it, I suppose. It's not censoring free speech. And it's interesting that the ACLU sounds a whole lot like Christian conservatives from the 90s and 2000s saying we should be allowed to teach prayer in schools. No, you can reject religious studies in public schools, and you can reject ideological studies all the same. I understand there's an unfortunate reality here. History is written by the victors. So what do? When we read our history books, it's favorable to the U.S. in many respects. So it's fine, in my opinion, if there's realities about our history that we should learn. It's another thing when some random person decides to write fake history, revisionist history for a newspaper and then acts like it's something worthy of being in schools. This person's not a historian. Sorry, she's not. She's just writing woke garbage. Maybe people are starting to wake up to it and they don't like it. Even the New York Times has published this op-ed, When Wokeness Becomes Weakness. Now, I'll tell you where I get really scared by all this stuff. We have this from the Daily Mail. The CIA's woke recruitment video gets panned. Recruit describes herself as intersectional cisgender millennial diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder in clip ridiculed online. I don't care to make fun of somebody. I have no qualms with this individual. I just think the issue is, why is the CIA recruiting wokeness on the basis of wokeness? Isn't the CIA supposed to be a strong organization? That kind of worries me. If our CIA is being compromised by cult ideology, how will they do their jobs? Our CIA needs to be discerning, intelligent, and analytical and tracking real threats. If they're part of a weird cult, they might start looking for the wrong thing. Makes sense, I guess. That's why they're so upset. The FBI is so obsessed with January 6th and doesn't seem to care at all about the ongoing year-long riots. Therein lies the problem. Destructive riots, destructive ideology, and its subsidiaries and its allies are ripping this country to shreds. And our CIA seemingly is in agreement with it. This won't end with the woke controlling things, because we're already seeing people revolt against this stuff. It's going to end with people outraged, pushing back and saying, I've had enough. And it's only then, I guess, we'll start seeing the decoupling, which may be already happening. Because of sanctuary states like California, because of now sanctuaries in places like, I think it's in Texas, where they're banning abortion outright, people are saying to the federal government, no, we don't care. We don't care what you rule. What are you going to do about it? And to be honest, what can the federal government really do about it? I'm not entirely sure where this all goes because I'm not a psychic. But I can tell you that in 2022, if this pace remains on track the way it is, then I certainly believe Republicans stand a good chance of winning. Democrats have fallen asleep. This is what happens every time they win. I'll tell you what happens if there's no pushback. Take a look at this. In a video from Andrew Doyle, he tweets, in this video, the police officer claims that the preacher is being arrested for hate crime following complaints that he caused distress by quoting from the Bible. Is there more to this case, or does the Bible now officially qualify as hate speech? This is the UK. They don't have free speech. They pretend to. A preacher was standing on a chair, quoting from the Bible. They said it was hate speech. That's absurd. People should be allowed to preach the Bible. One of the reasons we came to the colonists came to the U.S. was to flee religious persecution. So I'm not surprised the UK continues on with its history of targeting people based on what they believe. But make no mistake, if we don't stand up and push back against critical theory, this stuff will come here as well. Now, we have a constitution, but the constitution is only as strong as the people holding it up to defend us. If we stop defending the Constitution, then it erodes further and further, and then eventually there's nothing left to protect us. The Second Amendment is already the worst pile of Swiss cheese. The 10th Amendment seemingly meaningless at this point. And the First Amendment is under siege as well. The woke left wants to ban hate speech. You can't really define it for the most part, but they want to do it. And that means you will have to learn to live under the boot of the woke far left. But perhaps the backfire is significant. Perhaps James Carville in the DNC chair freaking out about this is a good sign. Moderate Democrat wins in Louisiana's special election for, I think it's a state Senate seat, or I believe it may be. That's good news. Wokeness hasn't actually been winning elections a whole lot. I do think Donald Trump created this problem, however. It was good that he was fighting against it. But the problem was that it woke up people who had no business being in politics and aligned them with the woke. I know people who had never uttered a political word in their lives, who did not vote for Obama, who did not vote for him the second time, and didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, coming out and saying they'd vote for Joe Biden because Trump was bad. They couldn't tell you why Trump was bad, but Trump certainly made them angry. So maybe Trump should not run in 2024. Ron DeSantis should. Trump is too polarizing. Now, a lot of people really want Trump to run They believe that Trump, running is going to be a landslide. I don't think so. I think if Trump runs, they're going to scream and say, he's back. Oh, what do we do? I think DeSantis should run. Oh, they'll smear him. They'll lie about him. But this will not rouse the sleeping traditional liberal the same way Trump will. Trump is a bombastic guy. They take him out of context. Ron DeSantis, they can get out of context. Ron DeSantis, they can smear, but he doesn't talk like Trump. He'd probably stay quiet, keep his mouth shut, and make it much more difficult for them. They will not be able to rile up traditional liberals and wake them up the same way they did with Trump. Trump didn't know when to keep his mouth shut to save his own presidency. That's true. I heard it over and over again from Trump fans saying they wish you would just shut up a bit. But again, as per usual, we'll see, because I don't know what can happen. A lot can happen between now and 2022. But I do think that wokeness is offending regular people. And you'll find more and more moderate types and independent types, people like me, saying, I don't want to have anything to do with that. So maybe they won't vote for Republicans, but maybe they won't vote for Democrats either. And we'll see. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.